On Zombie Reddit, today's story is:
My wife demanded a prenuptial agreement to protect herself from my failure, but when my business succeeded 6 years later, her attitude changed dramatically. A long time ago, my life was quite simple. Just a guy chasing an entrepreneurial dream, something I had sweated for and had every confidence in. Then I met Claire, who entered my world like an organized whirlwind. Her personality stood out for being calculating, detailed and extremely practical. I was captivated by her determination and her firm belief that everything should be planned methodically. So when we discussed marriage and building a life together, I wasn't surprised that she insisted on signing a prenuptial agreement. Honestly, I never imagined that this would become a problem. At first, I didn't think it was important. We were in love, or at least I thought we were. It seemed strange to me that our future should depend on a legal document. However, Claire assured me that it wasn't about a lack of trust, but about mutual protection. According to her, the agreement would benefit both of us if my venture failed. She emphasized that if things went wrong, she didn't want to be caught up in a financial disaster. And I naively agreed. I didn't know exactly how to feel about it. Part of me felt hurt because it seemed that she anticipated my failure, that she wouldn't be by my side if everything collapsed. But I convinced myself that she was just being practical. It wasn't that she wasn't supporting me, she was simply being cautious and protecting herself, as she herself explained. She assured me that we would be fine, that this was a mere formality, and her logic seemed reasonable, I told myself. She just didn't want to be left with nothing if the worst happened. By then we had been together for several of years, and the subject of marriage had come up many times. Her need for security and her insistence on the prenuptial agreement gave me the impression that for her marriage was more a list of requirements than an act of love. Even so, I agreed. I didn't think about it too much and buried any discomfort I felt. After all, I was going to marry the woman I loved. But something didn't sit right with me. I felt as if she considered me more of a financial risk than her life partner. It wasn't exactly love at first sight when it came to that agreement, but I convinced myself that this was simply part of her personality, her way of seeing the world. I kept thinking that maybe I was exaggerating, that it was just a piece of paper. Who could predict the future, right? So we got married. We signed the prenuptial agreement, had the wedding and moved on. For a while, everything seemed to be going well. The business was working, with difficulties, but it was still alive. I put my soul into avoiding failure. Sometimes I felt like I was swimming against the tide. The bills were piling up and I was constantly worried about cash flow and mounting debts. Claire, always pragmatic, never forgot to mention the prenuptial agreement. It seemed she needed to remind me periodically, as if preparing for a possible disaster. The financial discussions became tense. Claire seemed increasingly disconnected from the problems I was facing. She cared about the numbers, of course, but she focused mainly on securing her own future. And as my business began to show signs of strain, I couldn't help feeling that I was clinging to something that was slipping through my fingers. It was hard not to feel alone at times like these, especially when Claire, who should have been my ally, continued to emphasize the very thing that made me feel isolated, the prenuptial agreement. She always expressed her support, but in a way that never felt genuine. She kept saying it was just a security measure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more about her protection than my success. It wasn't that she was insensitive, but she was too focused on protecting herself. Just in case my career path failed. The challenges continued, the business wasn't going under, but it wasn't thriving either. It was like walking a tightrope, gradually losing my balance. The uncertainty was eating away at me, and no matter how hard I tried to keep the stress away from Claire, I could feel the pressure every time she mentioned our financial situation. We still hadn't unified our finances, not completely, not as a married couple should. Yes, we had some joint accounts, but mainly we kept things separate. Just as the prenuptial agreement stipulated. I hated it. We seemed like two strangers living parallel lives instead of being a united couple. Every time I looked at her, I wondered if she really believed in me, in us. The pressure increased. I would come home late, exhausted, and Claire would be there waiting. She would ask me how my day had been, and I would give the same answer as always. Good, but not good. It was far from good. She could sense my stress. But instead of comforting me, she seemed to distance herself more. I wondered if she had made any progress. If she had good news, and I would tell her that I was working on it. That we were just going through a bad patch. She nodded and smiled, but I could see that she was thinking about the prenuptial agreement. It wasn't a malicious thing, but there was a lack of empathy for my situation. I had to admit it at that moment. I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. Claire's attachment to the prenuptial agreement wasn't just about money. It was about control. She needed to feel in control, especially when things were uncertain. I hated it. But I understood it, at least to a certain extent. But what I didn't understand was why she didn't trust me. She wasn't supporting me the way a spouse should, at least not emotionally. Her concerns were always practical. Always about what would happen if things failed. She never asked me how I really felt, how I truly felt. She never said, "I'm here for you." It was always about the business, about the money. And then, of course, there were those little comments she made without thinking too much. But they hurt every time. Things like, "You'll be fine as long as you keep trying." Or maybe you should start planning for the worst-case scenario. I wasn't sure if she was trying to be realistic. Or if she was secretly hoping for a backup plan. Sometimes, when she made those comments, I would look at her and wonder if she really believed in me. The prenuptial agreement would certainly protect her if I failed. I tried to push those thoughts aside to concentrate on fixing the business, on getting us back on track. But the tension was starting to show in our marriage. I felt as if we were both waiting for something to break. And I wasn't sure what would give way first, the business or our relationship, but it's funny how life can change in an instant. How everything you thought you knew about yourself, about those around you, can be transformed without warning. That's exactly what happened to Claire and me. The business, the one I had been fighting to keep afloat for years, had finally found its way. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. New clients, new partnerships, and everything seemed to fit together perfectly. I had always believed in my business. And now, finally, the results were clear to see. I had something to be proud of. However, when I went to share the good news with Claire, something felt strange. I told her about the contracts we had signed, the new funding we had secured. I expected her to be excited, to celebrate with me, but instead she barely reacted. Her eyes didn't sparkle like they used to when I talked about my work. She remained calm, almost indifferent, as if the success was unimportant. And then, in that calm voice of hers, she said, "Well, I guess it's a good thing I pushed you to get that prenup, huh?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't the congratulations I was expecting, not even the support I needed. It was as if she was reminding me that this success was still an issue for her, that she had always been looking out for herself. The prenup had become a disadvantage for her. At first I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to explode, to ask her why she was acting like this, why she couldn't just celebrate with me for once. But a part of me, one that had remained silent for a long time, felt betrayed. She had been so focused on protecting herself, so focused on the prenuptial agreement and the what-ifs, that she never really saw me, saw my struggle or my determination. We remained silent for a long time, his words floating between us. He was furious. But more than that, he was disappointed. I thought we had overcome that phase, that we could finally breathe easy together. But instead, here we were again. After an extended pause, I finally spoke. I told her it wasn't just about the money, and that I had worked hard to make this business a success. And if she couldn't see that, then maybe we were in different places. She said nothing, but I could see the gears turning in her head. I could feel her backing away, as if calculating her next move. In that moment, I realized something that I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. Claire had never been completely committed to me and my dreams. She was always protecting herself. She had never given herself completely, not like me. And that revelation hurt. Update 1. The following weeks were tense. Claire seemed to grow more and more distant, not physically, but emotionally. I kept wondering if I had imagined it all before, the love, the connection, or maybe it had always been about the money. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Claire came to me with a request. It was like a punch in the stomach. She wanted to quit her job. I couldn't believe it. She had always been so independent, so determined to forge her own path. But now, just when things were improving for me, when I had finally achieved what I had worked for all these years, she wanted to take a step back and leave her job, so she could spend more time with me, she said. Of course, there was more to it than that. She wasn't just looking for more time together. She wanted us to merge our finances. To put everything together so that she wouldn't have to work anymore. It was like a slap in the face, but this time I didn't react immediately. I just stared at her, waiting for her explanation. I was stunned, not sure if I was understanding her correctly. She wanted me to cover all expenses so that she could live comfortably. She tried to justify it by saying that I had always supported her, and that I had always been there when she needed me. She reminded me how she had insisted on the prenuptial agreement because of the difficulties of my business, and how she wanted to protect herself. She said that she had always been thinking about the future, about us, and now that things were improving, she wanted to focus on building a life together. She wanted to pursue her own dreams. I could hear her words, but I couldn't process them. How could she ask for this? How could she demand that I merge our finances, that I help her leave her job, when she had never been fully committed to me from the start? Where did the prenuptial agreement stand now? I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to scream, to tell her how selfish she was being. But instead, I just stood there, stunned. I felt used, as if she was trying to rewrite the rules of our marriage, trying to make me forget how we got here in the first place. Claire noticed my silence and tried to soften the impact. She said she was just looking out for our future, and that it wasn't about being selfish. But the truth is that it felt like everything revolved around her. Her comfort, her security. She seemed to want me to take all the risk while she reaped the rewards. I told her that I needed time to think about it, and that I wasn't sure what I could do. I needed to process everything. I needed to understand what this meant for us, for our marriage. What am I doing here? I'm completely confused. Update 2. The days following Claire's request were some of the most difficult I had faced in our marriage. I had always been willing to sacrifice for our future. But now it seemed that she wanted me to bear the full burden while she took a step back. My mind kept going over things in my head, and I found myself asking questions that I never thought I would have to ask. Was she with me because she loved me, or because she was looking for security? Was I just someone she could rely on when things were going well? I tried to talk to her, but every conversation seemed to lead to the same point. She insisted that she wasn't asking for much, that she just wanted us to be comfortable, to have a life free of financial worries. And although I understood that sentiment, I felt selfish. I had built this business from scratch, I had invested years of my life in it, and now, because I was finally successful, I expected her to change everything, to unify our finances, to take financial responsibility for both of us. I had been willing to support her dreams, to stand by her no matter what. But now, it felt like she was abandoning me, or at least my dreams, in favor of her own comfort. One night after dinner, I tried to have a serious conversation with her. I told her that I didn't feel like she treated me as an equal. I needed to understand what she wanted from this marriage. What she expected from me, from us. I was ready to listen to her perspective, to understand. But instead of an answer, she gave me a well-rehearsed explanation about wanting security, wanting a future without stress about bills or work. She had probably practiced to convince herself that all this was for the right reasons. But there was something in her gaze that made me question everything. It wasn't the emotion I had seen before when she talked about our future. It was something more calculating, as if evaluating the benefits of this plan for herself. I began to feel that I no longer knew her. She told me that she had always worried about what would happen if the business failed, and that she wanted to make sure we wouldn't be left with nothing. But what happened now? What was she supposed to do with the success we had achieved? She prioritized her interests at every step. The same thing that she had insisted on to protect herself now made her feel at a disadvantage. She was asking me for an emotional investment in her future, but she had never fully invested in mine. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, processing everything we had said to each other. I had given everything to this relationship, to this business, and now I wondered if she was here for the right reasons, something I shouldn't even be questioning. She is my wife, after all. The next morning, Claire had a meeting at work. I didn't ask what it was about. I didn't want to go back to that subject. But when she left, I felt an unexpected loneliness. I realized in that moment of calm that something was broken between us. When Claire returned that night, I noticed that she was still promoting her idea. She had a list of reasons why this was the best option for us. Financial freedom, more time together, less stress, but I wasn't ready to accept it. I needed more than her explanations. I told her that we needed to reconsider everything, and that we should talk it through before making any decisions. She didn't like that. She said I was making too much of it, that I was making a big deal out of something insignificant. She said I was being unfair to her, and that I just wanted a future where we could be happy together. But her words didn't calm my mind. They only increased my confusion. Update 3. The following days were tense. Claire and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about practical matters. She talked about our finances, about unifying them, about her job and her desire to leave it. But there was a lack of conversation about us, about our relationship. It was as if everything had changed, and now the only thing that mattered to her was securing her future, not the future that we were supposed to build together. I knew I needed to decide. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I felt like this. I couldn't pretend that her constant pressure for financial security wasn't creating a rift between us. But I didn't want to lose her either, although I wasn't sure I could trust her anymore. It all came to a head one night. Claire came home from work and sat down next to me. Her expression was serious, almost too serious. She told me that she had given a lot of thought to what I had said, to how I felt. She apologized for putting so much pressure on me. She tried to explain that she wasn't asking for too much, that it was just the natural next step in our relationship. But I wasn't convinced. I told her that I couldn't continue, that I couldn't merge our finances with someone who apparently didn't have my best interests in mind. If she wanted to leave her job, that was her decision. But I wasn't going to blindly support her. She needed to understand that her actions had consequences. I couldn't expect her to bear the whole burden. Her face changed. She seemed hurt, but I could sense her defensiveness. She started talking about her hard work, how she had always been there for me, but I interrupted her. I told her I didn't need any more excuses. What I needed was for her to understand that this was a partnership, not a one-sided arrangement. And if she couldn't see that, maybe we didn't share the same vision. The silence that followed was deafening. We both stared at each other. I didn't know what to say next. Finally, she spoke, her voice wavering. She said she never wanted to make me feel this way, and that she had always considered us a team. I didn't know how to respond. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I couldn't keep trying to make her understand. So I got up, grabbed my jacket and left the house. I needed space and time to reflect. When I returned late that night, the house was dark except for a lamp in the living room. Claire was sitting on the sofa, arms folded tightly. Her expression was indecipherable, but her posture screamed frustration. I could tell that she had been waiting for me, probably reflecting while I was trying to clear my head outside. Before I could speak, she exploded. She said she couldn't believe I had left during a conversation so crucial to our future. She accused me of being selfish and not valuing all that I had done for her over the years. I let her talk because honestly, I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. But the more she spoke, the more her words revealed something deep, her own insecurities. She said that she had never felt secure in this marriage, that the prenuptial agreement had been her protection because she had always feared that I could fail, that I could drag her down with me. Hearing that was devastating. I had always thought that we were a team, that she believed in me even in difficult times. But now it was clear, she had never really trusted in my success. When she finally fell silent, I told her exactly how her words had made me feel. I told her that her lack of faith in me was the most painful thing, not the prenuptial agreement, not her demands, but the fact that she had always been preparing for the worst instead of hoping for the best with me. I said that a marriage based on doubt was not a real marriage, and that her current actions only reinforced that doubt. She seemed stunned, as if she hadn't expected such frankness. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, that she would finally see things from my perspective, but instead she defended herself. She said I wasn't wrong to protect myself, that I had the right to look after my future. She said that the success of my business didn't erase years of uncertainty. The nights she spent worrying about whether we would make it, we were at a standstill. No matter how hard I tried to explain my feelings, she couldn't or wouldn't understand. She was so focused on her perspective that she didn't see how much damage it was doing to our relationship. I told her I needed time to think. I slept alone that night in the guest room. The silence between us was louder than any previous argument. The next morning, Claire had already left when I woke up. She had left a note in the kitchen, saying that she had taken the day off to visit her parents. I didn't know if it was to avoid me, or if she really needed advice, but either way, I was relieved to have the house to myself. I spent the day reflecting on everything that had happened. By the time Claire returned that night, I had made a decision. I told her that we needed to have an honest conversation, without accusations or defensiveness. I said that we should find out if we really shared the same vision for our future, or if we were just trying to force something that was no longer working. Surprisingly, she agreed. She said she had spoken to her parents and realized that she might have been too focused on their fears and insecurities. She admitted that she had always feared failure, not only mine, but hers too. She said that quitting her job and depending on me completely felt like her last bet. I told her that the moment of her change of attitude, from wanting everything separate to now wanting to unify it, she felt opportunistic. I told her that it made me feel used, as if my success suddenly became convenient for her. It was hard to admit, but it weighed on me and I needed her to know that. Claire's eyes widened and I saw her defenses immediately go up. She said she couldn't believe I thought she was trying to take advantage of me, and that I completely misinterpreted her intentions. She said she had always supported me in her own way, even if it wasn't how I wanted or expected. Her tone became sharp and for a moment I feared another argument. But then she took a deep breath and softened. She said she didn't want to give the impression that she was only interested in my success now that it was real. She admitted that it probably seemed that way and understood why I would feel that way. She said she hadn't considered what her actions would look like because she was so caught up in her own emotions and fears. I nodded, grateful for her willingness to acknowledge it. I told her that my discomfort wasn't just about finances. It was about everything that had brought us here: the prenuptial agreement, the lack of trust, the feeling that we operated as separate individuals instead of a united team. I said that I felt as if I had been climbing a mountain, and instead of cheering me on from below or meeting me halfway, she had waited at the top ready to receive benefits without sharing the struggle. Claire flinched at that, but did not argue. Instead, she said she wanted to explain her position. She said that her insecurities about money and stability ran deeper than I probably knew and had shaped her mindset long before we met. Claire told me that during her childhood, her family had always been financially unstable. Her father was also an entrepreneur, but unlike me, he failed repeatedly. She said she remembered seeing her mother working herself to the bone to make up for her father's losses, taking on extra shifts and stretching every penny to support the family. She said that her parents' constant fights over money left a mark on her, making her determined never to end up in the same situation. She said that when we got married, she had been terrified that history would repeat itself. She had seen many similarities between her father and me: our ambition, our determination, our refusal to give up, and that scared her. She said that the prenuptial agreement was her way of protecting herself, of making sure that she wouldn't end up like her mother, trapped in a cycle of financial instability and resentment. Hearing her say all this surprised me. I knew about her father's failures and her parents' problems, but I hadn't understood how deeply they affected her. I told her that I wished she had shared these fears before, that maybe we could have overcome them together instead of letting them create a rift between us. Claire said she didn't know how to talk about it. She said she had always felt ashamed of her fears, as if they were a weakness she had to hide. She said she had tried to be strong, to support me in her own way, but her actions had been shaped by her past more than she had realized. I told him that I now understood his position, but that didn't erase the damage caused by his actions. I said that we couldn't continue to live under the shadow of his past, my fears, or anything else that prevented us from being a real team. Claire nodded, tears forming. She said she wanted to improve. As we sat together, I realized that this conversation was the most honest we had ever had. It was painful and raw, but necessary. If we were going to rebuild our marriage, it had to start here, with both of us acknowledging our faults and committing to improve. Update 4. I've been thinking about what everyone might think of this situation. I mean, I understand that sharing my story here has probably generated all kinds of opinions. Some people believe that Claire is completely wrong, that she is selfish or a gold digger, or any other popular label. I won't lie, there were times when I felt that way too. When she first mentioned unifying our finances, it felt like a betrayal. As if she only cared about my success now that it was real, but after our conversation I see that it's not that simple. Her actions were shaped by her past, by fears and insecurities that even she had not fully processed. Does that justify everything? No, but it explains it and gives me hope that we can overcome it together. Finally, I know some might be thinking, why are you still with her? If you're so unhappy, why don't you end it all and move on? And to that, I would respond as follows: marriage is not about perfection, it's not about finding someone who will never make mistakes or disappoint you. It's about choosing to overcome the difficult moments, about growing together even when it would be easier to walk away. Claire and I have a long way to go, but I believe in us. I believe we can come out of this stronger as long as we're both willing to work hard. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are no simple answers here. Relationships are complicated, messy and deeply personal. What works for one couple might not work for another, and that's okay. All I can do is continue to be honest with myself, with Claire and with all of you, and hope that we're moving in the right direction.